So the 2024 Australian Grand Prix has been and gone, and in all honesty, a minor miracle has occurred. Max Verstappen hasn't won a race for the first time in I don't even know how long. And once again, the person knocking him off that top spot is Carlos Sainz, just 2 weeks after having his appendix out. Now, I'm not saying the two things are related, but I'm pretty sure there's some weight-saving advantages here. However, having a different winner is apparently something that you guys are pretty pleased with, as based on the poll that I put out on the channel after the race, you guys have given it 4.1 stars. I mean, there may be a little max DNF bias in there, but you guys still seem to enjoy it. But with that out of the way, let's get into my best and worst drivers and my race ratings for the 2024 Australian Grand Prix. Now, I'd like to start off the bottom 5 by just clarifying something, which is that no one was overly awful in this race. There was no one who did a Lance Stroll and just suddenly forgot how to drive a few laps in. I mean, Max Verstappen's right rear brake did, but still, that's on the brake, not the person. So just because these drivers are all in my bottom 5 doesn't mean they were so ridiculously far away from the rest of the pack. As my 5th worst driver though, I do have Valtteri Bottas. Yes, it seems that completing normal pit stops is something just utterly unimaginable to the Sauber team, but Valtteri was still quite uninspiring in his drive. Both him and his teammate had slow stops, however when you look at where they started versus where they finished, Valtteri still managed to go back a place even with Hamilton, Verstappen and Russell DNFing, whereas Joe on the other hand moved up a few places. I think this race kind of sums up how Valtteri's been for a while, which is just generally a little bit uninspiring. His commercials on the other hand, completely different ballgame. But for Valtteri Bottas' on-track performance, he's going to be getting a 5 in this one, just below average, just not really anything too special. Next up then, in the 4th worst slot, it's going to be George Russell. Now, this is going to be a really interesting one here, because obviously for 57 laps of the race, he generally did absolutely fine. And his crash that came on what was the final lap of the race, as per the stewards, wasn't actually his fault. However, when you do look at it, in my opinion, there is a little bit of blame to be given to George there. You can't suddenly forget how to drive your car just because the one in front is a bit closer to you. At the end of the day, it's not like he's rammed into the back of Alonso because of how bad a brake check it was. However, I do think you have to portion a small amount of blame to Russell. I'd sum it up by saying that if he hadn't crashed, that wouldn't have even been investigated for a penalty for Alonso. So for a rating for George, he's going to get a 5 in this one. Considering that an average is 5.5, he was probably sitting around that 5.56 mark, but it's just going to get docked a mark for what was something that was kind of his fault, but also kind of not his fault. Then as my 3rd worst driver, sticking with the last lap crash theme, it's Fernando Alonso. Now obviously the big talking point for Fernando was that penalty he got at the end, 20 seconds, which in my opinion is a little bit harsh. Don't get me wrong, I do think he did things wrong, and that you can really see from the onboard how ridiculously early he's lifted off there. I wouldn't necessarily call it brake checking as such, but I would call it kind of erratic driving. And again, as I say, if Russell hadn't crashed, I don't think you'd even be looking at an investigation. And I know that F1 penalties aren't supposed to be judged on their consequences, but let's be honest, they always are. And so for this one, I can understand why Alonso gets that penalty, but maybe it should have only been 5 or 10 seconds. For the rest of the race though, there were some really great moments. For example, when Sergio Perez got by and he was able to stick on the back of him. Then again, it is Sergio Perez, so take that with a pinch of salt. For Alonso though, in this one, he's going to be getting a 5, the same as George Russell, both in similar positions where the race has gone generally fine, but they've been docked a little bit at the end. On to my 2nd worst driver, and it's probably the one person who would have been hoping for a better weekend, Daniel Ricciardo. Australia could have been a place where he bounced back in front of the home fans and really made a charge for the season. Don't forget as well that Sergio Perez had an awful race in this one, so potentially even more you could light the fire under those Red Bull talks. I think for Daniel, the real thing that's giving him this lower rating and his 2nd worst position in this one is just where his teammate has finished. Yuki Tsunoda's up in 7th place, and considering that if all things are normal in a race, the best anything they can hope for is maybe 10th, that's a really great drive from Yuki, and Daniel's down there in 12th. He has made up a number of positions, but still, when you compare to where his teammate is, it just doesn't seem good enough. Daniel in this one is going to get a 4.5. Again, it's not like an egregious performance or anything, just a little bit below average when compared to the rest. And then of course, that does bring me on to my worst driver for the Australian Grand Prix, and actually I think it's a pretty easy decision in this one. It's Sergio Perez. This race was prime 2023 Sergio Perez. Max Verstappen is out of it, you've got a chance to really prove yourself and come through the field, and he just didn't. Admittedly, I would say the Red Bull didn't look as quick as it had been the start of the season, but still, it's a Red Bull. The fact that he was overtaken by George Russell early, took him a while to get by, then managed to get past Alonso but couldn't actually pull away from the Spaniard, it just all kind of adds up to the fact that it was kind of a disappointing race from Checo. And to be honest, the fact that after maybe 10 laps of the race we all knew he wasn't going to be winning it just kind of sums up where he was in this one. So for a rating for Checo, it's going to be a 4. He didn't crash or anything, he didn't make any errors, he was just quite slow. Into the top 5 now, and it's someone with back-to-back points, Nico Hülkenberg. The Haas driver came away with P9 in this one, being elevated with that Russell last lap crash. However, he was already going to be in 10th place, which would have got him some points. And in a Haas car, that's all you can really ask for. Generally throughout the race, he was ahead of his teammate, making his way past Alex Albon fairly easily, and then just maintaining that position and his gap to Magnussen behind. Don't forget as well that he started this one just behind his teammate, and at the end of it all has made up 7 positions from where he started. To me, that's a really great drive, and is going to get him a 7.5 rating, coming off the back of his great performance last time out in Saudi Arabia. Into 4th place then, and we have the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz. I'm joking, it's Charles Leclerc. It's still a decent performance from Charles, however when you look at how he's done over the past sort of races both this year and last year compared to Verstappen, you would have thought that maybe he'd have liked to have taken this chance to get the win. At the end of the day, he's only finished like a couple of seconds behind Carlos, however the difference here is Charles didn't overly look like winning it. Still, to make your way past the McLarens, to finish in 2nd place, to only be a couple of seconds off of the race win, it's a very solid drive as a whole. It's going to get Leclerc a 7.5, the same as Hülkenberg, but to me he's just that little bit ahead simply because, he's going for that race win. Then on to 3rd place, and it's the driver who finished 3rd, Lando Norris. I think it's fair to say that in this one the McLaren was the 2nd fastest car. However, I think the fact that he was generally closing towards Leclerc at the end of the race does show that McLaren did have some pace and that Norris honestly was doing a pretty good job. Factor in that he finished quite a way ahead of his teammate, they even had to swap the drivers round because it was pretty clear Norris was quicker, and then you combine that with his podium and it's a really solid drive. He hasn't had the best start to the year, however this is exactly the race he needed. You also got to feel sorry for Lando, he's also in that same position as Charles where sometimes he's been that 2nd quickest driver, and this time Verstappen's not there but the Ferraris are too quick. For a rating for Lando, he's going to be getting an 8. It's a really great performance, his first podium of the year, and something that McLaren will definitely be looking to build off of. Moving into the top 2, and it's Yuki Tsunoda. Tsunoda is really stepping up his game this year, either that or it's just Ricciardo being bad. However, this race really summed up how well he's doing this year. 7th place in a car that realistically, if everything goes normal, should probably finish about 12th. The other thing that really makes it an amazing performance is the fact that he was pretty much on the back of Lance Stroll, maybe a second or two away for most of the second half of the race. You factor in that we've often said this year that those top 5 cars are much further ahead than those bottom 5, and that really shows just how good a performance it was. So for him, for a rating, it might be one of the best ratings I think I've ever given him, and it's an 8.5, right up there at the top end and really deserving of that high score. And in 1st place, there was really only one driver that could fill this spot, Carlos Sainz. The only driver to stop Max Verstappen, it seems, having won 2 of the last 20 odd races and stopping a Max Verstappen 20 win streak. Not to mention the fact that Carlos is just a couple of weeks removed from having his appendix out, yet he somehow managed to win that race. And the difference here is, he looks comfortable the whole time. For this one, Carlos is going to get a 9, it's a really top performance from him. I guess the only thing you could say is maybe there'd be a bit more of a gap if you want to get like a 9.5 or a 10, but still in general, to be able to take that win when you're given the opportunity, given you're coming back off of the surgery, it's an amazing race for Carlos. So there you have my race ratings for the 2024 Australian Grand Prix. As I said, it's quite a small spread in this one. There aren't really drivers who have been awful, aka Lance Stroll, Saudi Arabia, Hülkenberg in Bahrain, and so there's not too much between that midfield pack. But anyways, that is all for now. I hope you have enjoyed the video. If you have, make sure to give it a thumbs up, get yourself subscribed to the channel, and until next time, take care.